Thank you for the opportunity to be here with so many veterans and military families. I truly am grateful for the opportunity to share this moment with you. As a retired military officer, it is a humbling, solemn duty to share with you a bit of history, a few comments about this historic occasion. 100 years ago, plus 4, so when the war began in 1914, a complex web of secret alliances, long-simmering grudges, miscalculations, misunderstandings of emergent technologies, widespread unrest, and ungoverned nationalism finally boiled over, and it became the First World War. The first war fought on a global scale. Initially believed by the Allies and Central Powers alike to be a brief clash, the war evolved into a slaughter, an industrial-scale killing of over 10 million people, with at least 1/3 of those casualties being civilians. The United States entered the war, to end all wars, in the summer of 1917. And the American Expeditionary Force, led by General John J. Pershing, made the critical difference, turning virtual stalemate into a victory for the Allies. And Oregonians, like Americans from all states and territories, would play a significant role in that victory. Wars are fought by men and women, and there are many stories of courage, devotion, and duty that could be shared today. Unfortunately, our time together does not allow us to reflect upon them all. We can, however, remember the lives of a few Oregonians who sacrificed and served in the great cause of their generation. Frank Cassius Burns was a teenager when he moved from Ohio to the north central Oregon rolling hills with his family. He quickly made friends and became a part of the close-knit community of Condon in Gilliam County. After attending college at Mount Angel, Mr. Burns returned to Condon to work as a clerk and later treasurer for a small local company. Soon after the declaration of war, Burns enlisted in the cavalry but was discharged because he was underweight. He returned to Condon, resolved to gain the needed weight, and was once again rejected. Undaunted, he kept trying and eventually was accepted, this time into the draft. Burns volunteered for active service with the infantry and within 6 weeks, was under fire in France. Taking advantage of his light weight, Burns served as a runner or a message courier in an era when more technologically advanced battlefield communications were unreliable. He also volunteered to help with wounded soldiers. Burns' last fight came on August 29, 1918, when his battalion was engaged in support of a battle at Chateau Thierry. The frontline troops were retreating through his battalion as the Germans were counterattacking. The commanding officer sent Burns and another soldier to capture a German machine gun that 5 men had been operating from behind a railroad fill, but shells were falling dangerously close. One struck a direct hit on the machine gun, killing 3 men and wounding Burns, who was just 25 feet away. Although he remained conscious, the highly explosive shell shattered his hips. Aware of his mortal wounds, Burns confided to his friends, "I'm not going to live." After they tried to encourage him, he replied, "I know what I'm talking about." Burns died at a nearby dressing station earlier the next morning. In recognition of his bravery, Burns received the Distinguished Service Medal posthumously. He was eulogized by the Condon Globe newspaper as Gilliam's first sacrifice in war for liberty and freedom of the entire world. The newspaper noted that his parents could at least have the consideration and the consolation of knowing he was killed and not taken to languish in a German prison camp. It added the question, "Killed in action, what more glorious epitaph can any man have?" The same day the U.S. declared war, April 6, 1917, Hugh Broomfield took the physical examination to enlist in the Army Reserve Corps. He entered the 1st Soldiers Officer Training Camp at Presidio in San Francisco, California in May. After 3 weeks, he was asked to transfer to the aviation section of the Signal Reserve Corps. By the summer of 1918, Broomfield joined the 90th Aero Squadron of the American Expeditionary Force, just before the St. Mihiel offensive in September. He controlled the field operations for the squadron. On the field from dawn until dusk, he helped the squadron fly an unusually high number of missions. On October 21st, the Corps commander sent a message to the squadron during an offensive at Verdun, as we know, one of the bloodiest battlefields of the war. He urgently needed a plane to penetrate the German lines and bring back information about the enemy's ability to launch a counterattack. Lieutenant Broomfield and his observer immediately volunteered for the mission, and eager to go, left the squadron's aerodrome at 10 a.m. They flew into a very dangerous sky. The low-lying clouds gave the advantage of surprise attack to the enemy planes and ground machine guns, since Broomfield was forced to fly at a very low altitude. Dodging enemy fire, the two lieutenants made it over the German lines and began observations. Meanwhile, back at squadron headquarters, Flight Commander Norris Pearson waited for the mission to return. They should have been back by noon. Pearson waited as the afternoon began. He called all of the balloon and ground units he could reach by telephone. They reported an American plane had been seen falling at 11:15 a.m. behind the German lines. About 2 weeks later, the Allied offensive moved into the territory that had been held by the Germans. Pears soon heard by telephone about a wrecked plane in the area Bloomfield had been throughout that day. They soon enough found the plane and identified the bodies. Early the next year, the United States government posthumously awarded the Distinguished Service Cross to Broomfield in recognition of his extraordinary heroism in action on the day he met his death. Oregon women served too. Oregon women served as nurses for the Army and Navy and for support organizations such as the Red Cross. Some worked in France and other war-torn countries, while others served at military camps in the United States. Farmer Willard McKern and his wife, Edna, saw their 20-year-old daughter, Enid, off from a home near Mount Vernon to start her new life as a nurse. She heard about the government's call for service, dreamed about foreign service, and on a fall day in 1918, she began her preparation in the United States Student Nurse Reserve. The reserve assigned her to St. Elizabeth's Hospital in Baker, now we'd call it Baker City. Once in Baker, she began her studies and training, but within a few days, she was stricken with Spanish influenza. The hospital informed her parents, and her mother soon arrived from Mount Vernon. She developed pneumonia, and after a total of 9 days, she passed. Her father arrived at the hospital just as she passed away. The family returned her body to Mount Vernon, where she received a military funeral. She was eulogized as a big, strong, fine-looking girl who offered her life and died while serving others that this world might be better. Many Oregon women, such as Irish-born Stasia Welsh of Pendleton, did go to see extensive service in France. She joined the Army Nurse Corps through the Red Cross in 1918. Already a nurse in civilian life, she quickly became a member of Base Hospital 46 and in March was assigned to service at Camp Lee, Virginia. By the 4th of July, Stasia was shipping out at the hospital for duty in France. She served for the duration of the war, tending to the injured and sick soldiers coming in from the front. Her hospital service in France continued until June of 1919 as the country tried to recover from 4 years of total war. In addition to the men and women who served and sacrificed and passed, it's important that we also remember the missing. In the chaos and destruction of combat, many Oregonians simply were never seen again. The following is a story of one Oregon soldier missing in action. Silverton's Dilbert Reeves never graduated from high school. He finished the 8th grade and went to work, which was not uncommon in the years before World War I. His job at the local sawmill certainly didn't require a high school diploma. But Reeves looked beyond his sawmill job and decided to enlist in the Oregon National Guard. On March 29, 1917, just before America declared war, he went to nearby Woodburn and signed up. The U.S. Army called up much of the National Guard in the months after the declaration. In fact, Reeves was mustered into federal service 2 days before the formal declaration was passed by the Senate and found himself in General Pershing's American Expeditionary Force. In July 1917, before he left for France, he married Inez Williams in Grants Pass. In the following months, he worked hard and was promoted to corporal in November. By the next summer, Reeves was seeing plenty of action at the front, somewhere in France. At one point, he was separated from his bunch and had to go over the top, in his words. Reeves came upon 12 German soldiers and took them all prisoner, later recalling, "I sure had a devil of a time with them as they were scared to death and run around like a bunch of sheep." In July 1918, Reeves was back at the front, where he once again was separated from his squad in battle. But this time he would not return. The Army officially listed him as missing in action and eventually presumed dead. According to one estimate, over 14,000 Americans were listed as MIA in the Great War. And for those families, along with the nearly 2 million other missing in action soldiers from families from the Allied and Central Powers, the memories of the Great War remained unresolved for generations. Today, the centennial anniversary of the armistice that ended the slaughter, we must reflect, remember, and resolve. We must reflect upon the price paid for our freedoms, the true price of war, all war, upon the combatant, their families, the innocents caught in the middle, and upon the values of the nations that go to war. We must remember the loved and lost. We must remember the sacrifice, the service, and the certainty for which our fallen die, for which our wounded have struggled to survive, for which the men and women we sent and continue to send into harm's way upon our behalf shoulder the burden. And we must resolve ourselves here, today, in this quiet moment, that war must always be the last alternative. We must resolve to keep faith with the men and women we ask to go, and we must resolve to be a nation worthy of that request to go. Let us together resolve that 100 years from today, when groups gather, they shall be able to look back upon global warfare as an ancient tragedy. Let us resolve to build a future where our differences are settled absent bloodshed, chaos, or military conquest. Together we can, and together we must seek this new world. And it is the history and the legacy of the men and women who fought 100 years ago for us that we must build upon. Thank you.